Hello, everyone. It's me, David Chen, here on the Decoding Reality Podcast, a decoding TV podcast. I'm here with my wife at Joy Napping. Joy, thanks for chatting with me today.
I wouldn't want to be anywhere else.
hmm Today on Decoding Reality, we are going to be discussing Love is Blind, Season 4, Episodes 6, 7, and 8, which are currently available on Netflix right now. You can find more episodes of this podcast over at decodingreality.tv. Check out our recap of the first few episodes, as well as Justin, Jordan, and Deja's recap of The Bachelor Season 27, a very entertaining podcast, if I do say so myself.
For a very sad season of television, for sure. The Zach Shallcross season of Bachelor.
Indeed. And you can also email me, or email us, I should say, at decodingtv@gmail.com. And do consider leaving a comment for us on this YouTube video at youtube.com/decodingtv, or leaving a Apple Podcast review for us, or leaving a kind note at decodingtv@gmail.com. We would really appreciate it. So, Joy, we are going to spoil and discuss everything through Love is Blind Season 4, Episodes 6, 7, and 8. These are the first episodes where we actually spend time in Seattle, which is where we
Woo!
live. And what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about our general thoughts on how this show depicts Seattle, followed by a discussion of each of the couples that is now in the show and whether or not we think they're going to make it all the way to the end. So let's begin, Joy. Let's start by talking about Seattle. And I just want to start by saying we got to see people like living in Seattle in Love is Blind Season 4. We got to see people going on dates in Seattle, meeting with their friends in Seattle. And I think the show makes Seattle look pretty awesome, personally. Like, what is your perception
Yeah,
on...
I mean, we have a personal. I mean, you and I live in Seattle. We met in Seattle. We dated in Seattle. We got married in Seattle. So of course we, are in the tank for our town to look good. But Chicago, where I've also lived, and that's where the first 2 seasons of Love is Blind were filmed. Um, it looks pretty good. Dallas looked okay. I think Seattle looks incredible. Like, I would want to go to Seattle after seeing just some of this visual imagery. And
Yeah.
it's really nice to see our hometown shown off that way. I do feel a little bit like Seattle is particularly gorgeous in the spring and summer, and that's when this was filmed. So, this is among the most sort of intoxicating times to see it. If you were to shoot it in January, people might come away with a different view. But it feels nice, and of course, it's nice to see places that you actually know.
I agree. Just there's a lot of water, there's a lot of greenery, there's some hip restaurants to go to. I think it makes Seattle look very desirable. I'll be honest, it made me feel good about living here. Like, I see the way it's depicted on screen. I'm like, oh, that looks like a pretty nice place to live. Oh, wait, I live here. Chicago is also very nice too. So I would say like it's up there with Chicago in terms of like how well the area is depicted. But it's cool.
Well, Seattle's depicted well visually. I would say some of the residents we get to meet are
It's not necessarily the Seattle's not bringing their best people necessarily.
I'm
The
either going to say it's not representative or it is representative, and I winced. It's somewhere
mhm.
in between those two.
I will also say, full disclosure, I consider myself friends with one of the people who happens to own and manage two of the restaurants depicted in the show. So,
That
uh,
was awesome.
yeah, it was so cool to see and all the restaurants are depicted like very positively, so it was nice to see that uh, some love given to my colleague and friends' restaurants. Very very cool. So
And it's a hard time for the restaurant business, so it actually did, feel nice to kind of
yeah,
highlight parts of our community.
millions of people will watch this show. So I think. You see the reaction online. People are like, "Oh, wow, Seattle looks pretty nice. I'm gonna go visit, and maybe they'll check out one of these places." And that's very cool. Okay, before we start talking couple by couple and discussing the developments that have occurred since the last time we chatted, why don't we start by reflecting on just like any overall thoughts on this batch of episodes 6, 7, and 8?
Well, I continue to feel that the hand of the producers gets stronger through
Yes.
this batch of episodes than in prior seasons. Um, they throw a quote unquote birthday party for Chelsea, which really feels like that is not the party Kwame would have organized or even Chelsea necessarily would have wanted. And it's just
Well,
a big excuse to
it's very
stir
clear
up.
when Chelsea's like, "Who's that?" At her own birthday party. It's like, I don't know if she was managing the invite list for this one.
Also absent Chelsea's actual friends who aren't on Love is Blind, presuming she has some.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
But I still, for whatever reason, the pods part of this show barely works for me, except that you get to meet somewhat interesting people. And this is the best part of the show for me as people start to, it sinks in like, oh, I have to move to where you live. And like, what does that mean if I'm not just hearing your voice, through a wall and putting my own mind palace story to that? Like, do I really want to share a dresser or a set of dresser drawers
Mhm.
with this
Mhm.
person? I
Mhm.
love meeting the friends and family. That's always fantastic. Um, and so for me, this is actually like it's normally the most wholesome and positive set of episodes, even if sometimes the families aren't
Mhm.
supportive, because they're not supportive typically for loving reasons, which is
Mhm.
like, wow, this seems
Right.
really
Right.
rash and like a bad decision. Um, that said, this middle bridge set of episodes, they really spiced it up by throwing in a twist to the rules of Love is Blind, which is you
Mhm.
can actually keep dating and get engaged to and get married on the same timeline to someone from the pods if you break it off with the first person from the pod. So like
Mhm.
it really is they're clearly making it up as they go along, building the
Yes.
plane as they fly it, but it is fairly entertaining in a trashy way. That giant plot twist, which I'm sure we will get to.
Yeah, so agreed with you about the producers being more evident in this part of the show. Um, but I'm getting that old Love is Blind feeling of feeling extremely guilty about watching the show because there's clearly one set of contestants where there are
Yeah.
some deep-seated psychological or emotional issues that need to be worked out, and being on the show Love is Blind is probably not helping that person.
Yes. Yes.
And that is very unfortunate to watch.
Yes. It's
And
hard.
I don't wish them any ill will, or they need time to like work out some things. And I say that like not condescendingly in any way. Like I'm just like
Yeah,
it's
but maybe
sad.
this show is not the environment for it.
Correct, absolutely
Yeah.
correct. Yeah. So, um, and it's like, oh wow, we're potentially about to watch another couple like self destruct as we have in previous seasons. And that is unfortunate, and I do not wish to be a party to that. But we're already
You
on
know,
this journey.
for what it's worth, it feels less at this moment volatile and damaging, that the show itself is responsible for less of the damage than, say, the Cole Zenab situation. So, I feel not entirely terrible about it.
Maybe, maybe.
You're unconvinced. Okay, well
I'm
we can hash
unconvinced,
through
but
it. Yeah. I'm not looking
yeah,
forward to that part of this recap, to be honest.
yeah. And the show Love Is Blind has always been incredibly vague with its rules. Uh, so in the first season, it wasn't clear that like at the altar, people would be deciding whether or not like that part, which is now very much people understand. Like you agree to get all your friends and family there, and then you might get said no to right at the day of. People understand that now. In the first season, that was not clear. It was just, hey, it's time to say yes or no. And then the producers knew what they were doing, but then it wasn't until the final episode that people really understood. What are the rules by which people get paired up in the pot? Like, the show doesn't really explain anything. So the idea
Um,
of, yep.
Oh, go ahead. And I just
So,
want to amplify one thing you're saying. We've now learned via, I think, like Reddit, but I think it is true that the contestants or the participants on the show sign a contract that if they do not go through with the wedding, they will be financially responsible for some giant payment to cover the costs of that wedding. And so there is an enormous pressure on people to at least get all the way to the altar, go through
yeah.
all the steps, be filmed, meet their friends, etc., even if their heart isn't in it, and then say no on that day. Like they can, I think, give a heads up to the other person, like it's going to be a no from me. But in order to just avoid owing someone $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 that you don't have. I think
Yeah.
that is an additional source of pressure that is only quasi revealed in the show. Like, I think Jackie might be out of here if it weren't for that money, is my guess.
Perhaps, but my point being, the show has never really been clear about what it's doing with the
Right.
contestants and what the rules are. So the idea of Zach and Bliss getting together, it's not really shocking, just because it's like, okay, the producers are playing their stupid games again, and that's fine. They're actively obscuring how the show actually functions. On that note, I do need to say that there is producer generated tension in this batch of episodes from the thing that you said about, I think you mentioned having the difficult conversations about where to live, right? Where, hey, we love each other, but can we make a home together? That is only a source of tension if the two people don't live in the same place. Which, the whole reason why you'd have a show called Love is Blind Seattle or wherever the heck is so that people live in the same area and they don't need to make these big decisions of, am I going to move to Portland? Am I going to move to Arizona? Right? So what they did was they brought in contestants from outside of this area, like Kwame from Portland and Micah, who apparently has a second house in Arizona, and so on and so forth. They brought in people from outside, presumably because they were unhappy with the crop of Seattle singles that they had, which is very unfortunate. So that, combined with the fact that there's very few Asian Americans in this season of the show.
I mean, there's
is
so much on the
yeah,
casting that is so sus to me.
yeah,
I understand when you cast, you need to be looking for certain things. So
yes.
I'm sure they had more than 30 people, 15 men and 15 women, show up for a casting call. But Seattle isn't that big. And maybe people had enough sense not to do this show.
Seattle people are also, in my
Now that
opinion,
they've
in general, pretty smart, and they've seen the emotional wreckage that Love is Blind has wrought, and they're like, none of that for us, please.
I'll just summarize this by saying I grew up in Louisiana, not in a big city, and my mother and father, spent 40, 50 years there. And upon retiring to Seattle, my mom looked around and she's like, people here are so civilized. And that was her contrast with, say, the rest of the country. And so I do think there is maybe something about Seattle being not a very good market for casting
Mm-hmm.
this kind of show. You also probably want people that are to some degree photogenic and, willing to put themselves out there for influencer careers. The ideal place to cast this show is obviously Los Angeles or Orange County or San Diego. Maybe they don't want to have too many like aspiring actors and models,
Right.
but um, suffice it to say,
We should point out that civilized is a pretty loaded term, Joy.
oh, is it?
I think so, especially if you're comparing it to like a place like Louisiana. So I think I will just say I think that people in Seattle are pretty. Most of the people I've met are pretty intelligent, and
You don't think that's even more insulting?
I'm not comparing it with another place. So anyway, point being, it's easily to see why they couldn't find the people they wanted in Seattle. They had to bring in people from outside. We should also point out that in the last week, it's been revealed that Kwame has apparently previously been a contestant on another reality dating show called Married at First Sight, which is very
Yeah.
similar to
Well, it's
Love
the
Is
same
Blind.
producers.
Yeah.
So it's very possible that not getting picked there, he would have been a top choice for another casting,
Yeah.
all of which is theoretically fine. But you just cannot help, if you are from Seattle, watching this show, waiting to find out who you know, because again, it's a small town and we all know each other. We're a couple degrees of separation away from each other. That it's kind of like almost feels insulting to find out that 2 of your 5 couples have one person from Portland. In Zach's case, so this is a third couple, he's from Wenatchee, which is like an hour east. It's a very,
Yeah, it's
very,
not.
very different town.
Apparently, he just moved recently to Seattle, so like that's fair enough. But yes, it's not. That is not Seattle, right?
Right. And so the Asian representation is weird. Honestly, it's a lot blacker of a show than Seattle is if you look at our sort of
Yeah.
census data that you and I talked about last time. And so it just feels like, again, they made the show they wanted. And it doesn't matter that Portland and Seattle are farther apart than DC and Philadelphia. It is like having people traverse 3 states in the Northeast to
Hmm.
say that they're like in the same market. And then obviously, to your point, when it comes to having to literally move, unearth your friend group, maybe start a new job or find like a whole different way of living, that is going to be a hurdle to somebody trying to decide to get married in 2 to 3 weeks.
Yeah.
So it feels very artificial.
It feels like they created these problems. The producers created these problems because it's like if you had just recruited everyone from Seattle, uh, that wouldn't be a source of tension for several of these couples. So whatever,
Whatever. Yes.
kind of a bummer that they marketed it as from Seattle, but it's not really a Seattle show because there's so many people that aren't from Seattle. Um, but we see you, producers. We see what you're doing. Okay, we see, and it's weird and it's off-putting. Okay,
And we
that's
don't
all.
need your stupid show anyway. We were all fine not dating each other and complaining about the weird
Hmm.
dating scene here.
Yes, I don't know that what the Seattle dating scene needed was Love Is Blind to come here and bring a lot of people from outside of town and throw them into the dating pool. That's and with their social experimental ways and such and such. Anyway, uh,
Well, can I just say about this topic? I don't know if we'll cover it again on a future episode. There is a very specific vibe to the Seattle dating scene. I was curious if they would talk about it in the pods, if they would, end up covering it in some ways. And I just want to hit a couple of
yeah,
these highlights. One is there's this concept of the Seattle freeze, which is that people are in these set friend groups of like 8 to 10 people. And if you aren't one of those 8 to 10, you literally cannot break in if you want to come in and make friends or start dating somebody. It's like a one in, one out system in these like fixed groups. Part of the Seattle freeze is also that people are incredibly polite and they almost seem like they're friendly, but they're actually not wanting to be friends with you. So they will say, "Oh yeah, I'd love to hang out," and then like zero follow up. It's quite bewildering, I think, for people who are from warmer, friendlier places like the South or California. Um, Another thing is there is so much like Netflix and I have a cat energy, like just a very nesting kind of vibe for
yes,
like at least
because it
half the
it
year.
rains 9 months out of the year, so there's a lot of many Seattle people stay indoors, and when they're not indoors, they're out hiking usually. So
Yes, and so that is by far the most sus part is that people don't seem very outdoorsy. They don't seem into like I would say you and I have the least REI equipment of anybody that we know. And like people have thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars of like camping gear. And, they like spend their whole summer like literally leaving work early if the sun starts to shine and like, finding campsites and competing for camp reservations. And I just, it's not necessarily my life, but none of that was evident again in anyone but Paul. And if anything, it feels like it's such a dominant part of meeting people here that it feels hard to do anything other than have those interests or at least feign that you have those interests. So anyway, I think
I mean,
this is all the
w-
Seattle
w-
vibe we're going to get. And I wanted to just sketch
yeah,
what I think the reality is.
that's fair. We should also acknowledge that Seattle has undergone a dramatic demographic transformation over the course of the last couple decades, largely because of an influx of tech workers. Amazon has grown significantly during the time since I have moved here 10 years ago, and so there are just now tens and tens and tens upon thousands of people that didn't live here 15, 20 years ago that now live here. But I think even within that new cohort, Joy's description of what the vibe is at least somewhat accurate. And so it is true. But at the same time, Joy, I wasn't really expecting any of that because I don't know that we really got a good sense of Dallas or Chicago from the previous seasons of Love Is Blind. So, it's not like there was that much commentary about Chicago's this kind of place to live. That was never in
Right,
the
but I lived
mix.
in Chicago and I recognize the vibe off of the people. Like I could even
Hmm.
probably guess which suburb Shayna's going to end up in. Like
Uh huh.
I found it very disorienting,
Hmm.
at least based on the pods. Now in this set of episodes, we get a little bit closer to it, and I called something pretty well last time. We can come back to that about where Micah's from. But I overall didn't feel like it kind of captured the place. And of
Yeah,
course, I know it's not their primary goal, but apparently it's kind of irrelevant and they can just throw people into Seattle and call it a Seattle show and it doesn't matter.
indeed, indeed. Throw in Micah from Arizona and Kwame from Portland and whoever else from and Zach from Wenatchee. It's just words don't even mean anything anymore. Okay, let's move on. So, which couples should we cover, Joy?
Well, I think by far the biggest development of these episodes is with Zach.
Yeah. So Zach broke it off with Irena the last few episodes, and
Irena
then
broke it off with Zach. Oh, yeah, I think you're right. I think you're technically
yeah,
right. Yeah.
she would have wanted to continue going on the show, and then the last time we saw him, he was about to confront Bliss at a uh, local Seattle restaurant in Capitol Hill, and he says to her, "Hey, I made the wrong choice. I should have chosen you." And she is initially very resistant to his pursuit because she felt very burned by him choosing Irena for a variety of reasons. But eventually, she comes around. They go on a date
They go
at
on
his
2 dates.
house, like at his
Yeah.
apartment, or I think. And then there's another date on Lake Union, which is if you aren't from here, it's basically like a large body of water that is like right in the middle of Seattle. It's very beautiful. A lot of boats go out there all the time. It's very easy to get out on there and look around, and it's a great way to see the city in some
Yeah,
ways.
it's a great focal point of the city. Like they do
Yeah,
fireworks over it and people crowd on
yeah,
all the hills around the lake and watch it and you can see downtown views. It's great.
it's great. Yeah, and he proposes to her, and then she says yes, and apparently they're going to get married on the same timeline as all the other people on the show.
So she's got
Uh,
even less time to get her head around it.
yeah.
And no trip to Mexico.
What are your thoughts on this storyline, Joy?
Well, first of all, I said I had not been to the restaurant Smith, which is where they meet. I have been to the restaurant Smith. I had forgotten. It's been a few years. I think it's a solid choice for where to have a complete I need to eat shit kind of meal with somebody. I I know this is
Eat shit
obviously
as in go
very
back on what you said, not that the food is bad at Smith. But yeah,
no, the food's actually pretty good. The
yeah.
fries were very good. Um, I know we get a very condensed version of this because, we watched 3 episodes, so that's about 3 hours, and they could have filled 3 hours just with Zach and Bliss, like, trying to hash it out? So we're only getting not even the Cliff's Notes, like, these sort of random high points or low points. But underneath it, I think Bliss should feel, like, pretty nervous that not only did she get second choiced and they have a whole discussion about what that
Hmm.
technically means at the end of the 8th episode. But also, she got second choice to someone who is patently and flagrantly a horrible person.
Yeah, it'd be one thing if Zach chose someone who is awesome, but then just wasn't the right fit for him,
Right, because
right?
then you'd understand and
Then
you'd be
it's
like,
like,
oh, I
okay,
kind of get it. She's kind
right,
of awesome.
yeah.
Yeah.
But she was clearly horrible. Everyone knows she's bad. Apparently, it is hinted that everyone in the pods knew she was terrible
Yes.
during the course of the episode as well. So, yeah.
Well, I did want to read because Zach has since posted on Instagram. So right after the first batch of episodes has come out, we already have like all the tentacles going out into social media of people responding to what's already been said
Yeah.
and shown,
And
and
what is new, I
so
think, is like is cast members giving interviews during as the episodes are released. I don't recall this happening in previous seasons. I recall an odd um, sort of a stray social media comment getting out into the world, but
yeah,
I think I'm not sure, but if I had to guess what's going on is like Entertainment Weekly or the Today Show or whatever has done an interview with these people, uh, like a full interview of everything, and then they're just releasing the information strategically throughout the season. Is my guess,
huh?
because I don't think they would allow. I don't think Netflix's PR, who has kept the results of the show really under lock and key in all previous seasons would just kind of let people be out there floating and giving stuff away. I think they have given interviews where they talk about like all the results and then they're releasing the information strategically.
Mm.
That is a very common tactic for TV shows, for movies to kind of tier their
Avoid
embargo.
spoilers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure, but that's based on
Well,
the amount of interviews I'm seeing. I don't recall this volume of interviews from
yeah, I
previous
think the
seasons.
broader
So
point you
yeah,
have still stands though, regardless of the how they're doing it. Like Irina, Chelsea, and Jackie were interviewed by Rachel Lindsay for I think for Extra. So Rachel Lindsay being sort of the very famous first
yeah,
Black Bachelorette and
yeah.
just like all around incredible hosting talent. Um, so I do feel like they're more kind of sharing proactively like PR for the show along the way. I honestly think maybe Netflix's whole like let's just dump a bunch of episodes of whatever we make strategy is starting to shift towards let's actually have some earned media and paid
Yes,
media and
absolutely.
actually create a little more buzz. Okay, so anyway, I wanted to read what
Yes.
Zach posted on Instagram because I think it's actually quite important. So this was not like a post; it was in comments responding to a question someone had. So um,
Hmm.
basically, the person who asked him a question said, "Let me get this straight. She forgot your birthday. She was horrible. She was rude. She was, and you saw through all of it. You correctly named all of it, and yet you still chose her. Like, and she was horrible to you. She said all these awful things behind your back about you being ick, and um, and I to be the one little thing I want to make sure I'm fair to Irina because we'll probably not talk about her again on future episodes of this podcast. Um, I've had that experience where there's someone who on paper I really should be attracted to, and I just am not. Like I literally physically want to be further away from them, and so um, it, I understand a little bit what she's saying. I think she was just incredibly rude in how she said it, but anyway, I think and it was so public, the way she said it. So anyway, he says that he has forgiven Irina for everything she did while they were on the show together. And he said she knows what she did, and she's definitely dealing with an amplified backlash from it. There are two major philosophical frameworks when it comes to justice: retribution versus rehabilitation. And he goes on to talk about how he doesn't believe in retribution. So, he's a criminal defense attorney. And I think
Hmm.
that his whole, like, I believe in the saving graces of anybody, belief system is right there. It requires a level of faith in humanity and love, even for the people who receive grace, have a chance to extend that grace to others. And all in all, between these two theories, I'll take grace over retribution any day. Um, so then uh, there was another question about like how strong, like why did you choose if you chose Irina over Bliss, Bliss does not deserve to be your second choice. And he wrote, first choice doesn't mean best choice. I think if you continue to watch closely, you can see who I loved more. Look at how I was when each relationship ended. Do you see how devastated I was when I ended it with Bliss? I laid on the couch with a pillow over my head, crying for hours. Okay, here we go. Here we go. Maybe the truth is I didn't have the courage to see if our love could overcome all obstacles. Maybe I thought there was too much in the real world that would get in the way. Maybe I thought she was a little too good for me. I wasn't just thinking about who was best for me. I was thinking about whose family would accept me and who would actually say I do at the altar and who would be able to accept me, all of me. I definitely did make the wrong choice, but first choice doesn't mean best choice.
That's a very thoughtful response, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it like dovetails with some stuff you and I said and other people have commented that maybe he like didn't quite because Irina is childish in some ways she's easy to read, and she's
Hmm.
easy to like it's a very known quantity what you're getting. She was really terrible and I think that is a really self-destructive choice still, but at least he's had like a chance to reflect on it and maybe grow
Hmm.
from it. So, yeah.
Yeah.
But so Zach manages to eat crow somewhat with Bliss, and I do think she is kind of picking up what he's putting down because she's like, "You have really pretty eyes, but I don't want to pay you any compliments right now because I'm still mad at you." Um, and then at the end of the date, he's like, "Let's do it again," and she says, "We'll see." And then I know we need to talk about their second date. We see 3 dates total. We see him apologize to her and meet her for the first time. We see this middle dinner date at his house, and then we see the proposal. Who they're probably seeing each other like more times in between then is my guess, and it's certainly stretching the concept of quote unquote love being blind because they're like seeing each other. Um, but David, I need you to weigh in on Zach's menu choices and his implementation of sous vide steak,
Yeah.
coconut shrimp, carrots, and mushrooms.
Uh, I have so many thoughts on this, and I'll try to distill it down. But let me talk overall about the Zach Bliss storyline. I think a lot of people reacting are rightly pointing out, why are they bringing in Bliss back in? The whole point of the show is that love, quote unquote, love is. The experiment is a farce at this point, right? Like the idea is like, hey, we're gonna introduce people and then they're gonna propose to each other and blah 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 and etc. And but then if you're just gonna be bringing in people from outside and then following them as well, it completely defeats the whole purpose of the enterprise. And then why aren't they doing this all the time? Why aren't they like tons of people? I'm sure had connections in the pods that like that never got to play out, and so they're being very selective because I think they think to themselves, there's probably a good story here, and maybe there is, but uh, it does just feel I do feel kind of like Walter Sobchak in The Big Lebowski, like, come on, dude, there are rules here, you know, uh, and and so that is pretty irritating. You know, I'm very torn on the Zach storyline because on the one hand, I think that the dude humiliated himself and made the worst choice you could possibly make. Hurt this person, Bliss, who by all accounts seems like a nice human being. Um, chose like the horrible person for terrible reasons. And on some level, the part of me that loves justice feels like, hey, you should need to live with that choice and suffer for it.
Oh wow, so you're in the retribution
Let
camp.
me I'm not done. Let me finish what I'm saying. On the other hand, um one of the most challenging parts about living human existence, I think, is um getting mating is a very difficult process for humans. In the sense that every single time you are with someone, you like learn a lot about yourself and about what you want. And then often you move on to the next person, and then you might think to yourself, "Oh, wait, like actually, I shouldn't have moved on. Like, uh, actually, the previous person was a better match." But you can't go back. Like it's just impractical 99% of the time to go back to previous choices. What this show presumes is, what if it were not? What if you could go back? What if you could turn back the clock and like redo a choice? And that's an interesting kind of exercise that is only possible in the confines of a reality dating show. Um, and so I appreciate the fact that it's an exercise. Joy, you seem to be reacting very strongly to what I'm saying.
I mean, I'm married to you presently, so if you were to want to go back, it would be from me.
I'm not saying me specifically. I'm saying like people in general. Like
No,
I
but that is your anyway. It was very funny. It was very funny the way you worded it. But also, you know, he's not really able to go back. I mean, he's technically able to keep talking to her, and they could keep talking on camera. You get the sense that they could have chosen to just keep dating in the real world and not have had Lake Union boat rides paid for and not have been on this accelerated timeline and just chatted, you know? But
I'm so curious, like what was going on behind the scenes. You know, a producer had to have gone to Bliss and said,
of course.
"Hey, do you want to be part of the show still? Because Zach's still into you, and there could be a good storyline. But if you are, you need to get married on this date with everyone else, and you need to say yes or no, and you need to invite all your friends. Blah blah blah. You know."
Yeah, I mean, I think they probably didn't. Who knows what they said? But I think my point is like it's not like he gets like a control X key or anything or a control escape key to get out of it because she still has the damage of knowing she got dumped by him.
Yes, certainly.
For a sort of vile child.
Certainly. And by the way, I tried to like detach my description as much from me as possible. I was saying human beings in general. I have read online. This is the experience that I have seen described.
Okay.
Okay. I was not describing my own experience.
Okay.
But Yeah, and to be fair, I think I certainly I was describing the two sides of myself that and how I feel about the Zach situation, right? Like on the one hand, he made a bad choice. He should need to live with it. On the other hand, it's like, oh, kind of interesting that the show is experimenting with the idea of going back and trying to undo something. You know, that's a potentially interesting exercise. Um, that said, I just find Zach to be a particularly not very interesting individual, and to see Bliss go back to him is painful. Apparently, you know, I've read some interviews with Bliss. They have great chemistry, so it's like, okay, whatever. If there's a lid for every pot, you know. So if she's thinking, if she is having a great time with Zach, then go wild, cool, live your life. But as an external viewer, it's really it's painful to watch because here's a guy who he is just this version of male mediocrity where he has not done anything competent on the show. In fact, consistently does things incompetently and yet continues to be rewarded for that. And I have encountered that archetype in my life many times, and I'm very
Okay.
put off by it. You know?
Mm. Mm.
Joy, what's your reaction to that?
Well, look, my antenna are always up for sort of people
Yes,
failing upward,
exactly. I'm shocked.
particularly
I'm shocked you don't
people
feel
of
this.
certain, size, shape, color, mostly color. um, but I think in Zach's specific case, I actually think with his story of growing up homeless under a bridge, his mom being a sex worker, and you know, then him actually managing to get through law school. I don't know that I think of him as like a guy who's just being rewarded for his quote unquote mediocrity. I think he has a lot of stuff and a lot of eccentric stuff. The man doesn't know that you cut the carrot before you cook the carrot. He thinks apparently you wait until afterwards and then you crumble goat cheese with your fingers, like smush it right down onto the carrots. Like there are things that the finer points that Zach doesn't seem to have like totally picked up about adulting.
In ascending order of outrageousness, it's choosing Irena instead of Bliss, cutting carrots in the incorrect way, doing goat cheese in the incorrect way, and then finally, not using a vacuum sealer for his sous vide cooking.
Oh,
Right?
you didn't even say the Harry Potter music when you enter the bedroom. I would not find that magical. I would run. But
Uh-huh.
Bliss seems to be picking up what he's putting out. You don't know that much about Bliss, I think is my
Exactly.
point.
Exactly. But what I have seen of Zach is he continually messes up everything, and but
Hmm.
Bliss is still into him, and it's like, okay, whatever, that's fine. I don't really, as you said, I don't really know that much about either of them. But you gotta vacuum seal your steak bags, people. Okay.
Tell
Um,
us more about this.
no, so Zach was sous videing his steak. And in all fairness, it is extremely possible. So, what for sous vide is, for those who don't know, is um, you basically place your protein into a sealed plastic bag, and you put it in water that has been heated to a very specific temperature. And the idea is that your steaks come out much more delicious this way because when you are cooking it on a grill or whatever, you cannot control what amount of heat is inflicted on the steak. So the steak often ends up overcooked, or it ends up tough, or whatever, or it ends up cooked to a level that you don't want. When you're sous videing, you can run it in the water for hours at one temperature, and therefore it comes out very juicy and very tender and very delicious. And so Zach was attempting to sous vide his steak um, with the method that I just described. Now, it is very possible to sous vide a steak using a normal Ziploc bag. In fact, I don't want to gatekeep. If you are trying to sous vide and you only have Ziploc bags, that's completely fine. But
And you came here for permission from David.
which so many of our
People have been
listeners
waiting with bated breath.
which so many of our listeners have, I know. So Okay, so then now if you want to run a more tight ship, if you want to run a more tight ship, you can use a vacuum sealer. So what you do is you would then take a plastic bag, seal it, suck all the air out of it, and then just drop it into the water. That's what I do because it is more likely that you'll have a better outcome. Now, some people in the people in the chat are making some comments. Ty is saying you can use a large plastic bag and have the opening outside of the container water. Yes, that's a great technique. Um, but Groove Robber says, could they have been salvaged with a quick sear, or is that not safe? The problem that happened with Zach's steaks is he used like what appeared to be a Ziploc plastic bag, put it into the water, and the problem is the water got into the steak. Like it got into the bag and it soaked through the bag, and that basically ruins the steak. Like you don't want to mix water with your steak unless
It's
you're
kind of
on
like a parboil type situation. So I
right.
think
Unless you're on
all
like
the
Tim
biting
Robinson's, I think
tenderness,
you should
yeah.
leave. There's a whole sketch on Tim Robinson's. I think you should leave about like eating steaks that have water on them, and it's amazing. But anyway, so anyway, he completely messed up not one but two steaks using that technique. Now, to his credit, he did have a backup plan of shrimp, and I did admire that because I'm like, okay, if that was me in that situation, I would have probably been so nervous that I also would have had a backup plan. And he had one, and I do admire that. So anyway,
I thought the shrimp looked potentially pre-prepared.
I don't think that he hand panko crusted those shrimp, in my
I don't
opinion.
think so either.
But yeah. So
Especially the way
anyway,
they were just sitting in the skillet. But according to Bliss, goat cheese tastes great on everything, even in ice cream. I have had goat cheese ice cream; it is good. And so she had everything she needed, and that was fine.
great, great. So yeah, those are my extremely ambivalent thoughts on Zach and Bliss. But hey, if people are happy, I don't want to take away from their happiness.
I
It's fine.
have actually found it interesting that there was quite a pile-on from the rest of the cast, as we saw in the edit in the first batch of episodes about Zach. It feels like that's gotten toned down a lot. I don't know if he's just getting a friendlier edit now. Many commenters, TikTokers, whatever that I've been following seem to be actually cheering for this couple. It feels 50-50, that 50% of people are like for it and 50% are like, Bliss, why
Bliss,
the
you
fuck are
should
you
not have
doing this?
taken him back, right? And
Yes.
I am definitely on the latter side. Also, as Groove Robber writes in the chat right now, what was the deal with the white owls and katana portrait?
Yeah. Okay. So I was like confused by this because he mentioned he had just moved to Seattle. I don't think that's his actual apartment. It just feels like a place that the producers would have rented for him. It looks completely generic, but there are 2 or 3 pieces of actual personal um
Personal
items. So
effects,
maybe he
yeah.
was allowed to bring a handful of things. So one is this painting of the owl that they had talked about in the pods, because she's really into owls and he's really into owls. So you see, it's meant to be. It's almost like knowing the song "I Hope You Dance."
Yeah, we didn't even talk about this. About like, was it Zach that was saying
I
how?
think it was Amber and Zach. So a couple
Oh,
that like
you
didn't it.
or Amber and Paul or whatever. You know, it was you know the song. What is it? What's the song?
I hope you dance.
You know the song I Hope You Dance? That's also a song I happen to know. It's like one of the most famous songs,
Well, particularly for weddings,
for
right?
weddings, yeah.
And so one of them was like, well, it was going to be the first song at my wedding for sure. And they're like,
You've
oh
heard
my
of Hey
God.
Jude?
Do you breathe air that's like 71% nitrogen? Because so do I.
Nitrogen. Really?
Yeah, it's 71% nitrogen, right?
Okay. All right. So yeah, I'm definitely on the not really rooting for the Zach Bliss relationship, but you know, where do you come down on it, Joy?
I, like Zach, believe in giving people grace and
Mhm.
also knowing that I can't really judge based on the edit. This is one where I really can't judge based on the edit because it's so condensed. And you have to believe he has to eat so much crow in the time to get Bliss to actually say yes. I think that there is an uncomfortable conversation after they're engaged. So we see them one more time, and she basically says, it's hard for me because I know I was your second choice. And he's like, well, you weren't my second choice. And I'm like, okay, you are a lawyer, Zach. I think you understand sequentially in time, it's linear.
Mhm.
So when someone gets chosen first, they are your first choice. So you can like talk about the semantics of what that means or what that means in your heart. But like, it is not fair for Bliss um, not to get some space to
Yeah.
really sit in what that felt like and for him to really say, okay, I understand the consequences of how it made you feel, even if I can't take it back.
Yeah, and honestly, that there were two moments when I really empathized with Zach. Right, one of them was that moment that you just said, where he's trying to say, "But no, you weren't my second choice." Because here's my interpretation of what was going on there: is that the choice of Irina was such a horrible screw up, like historically bad screw up that was documented for millions of people is so bad that he's like trying to compartmentalize it. I can see in his brain what was going on. He's like, yes, technically you were my second choice, but really that choice sucked so badly. Like I just you don't even comprehend how bad it was. You know, if you, I think he's trying to be like, if you knew how bad it was and how I feel nothing towards that person, you wouldn't even be saying that. I think that's kind of where he's coming from. Now, I agree with you. She should get like Bliss should get her opportunity to say what she feels. Um, but that's what I think was going on. Is
Well, he is hearing the question.
Bliss hasn't seen the Mexico tapes yet. Is the thing, right? And so at this point in time, presumably.
But
So
he is interpreting the question as Bliss is worried that Irina is a threat or that I still have feelings for someone else. And
yeah,
he's saying, I don't.
yeah, but
But
she's
he's
not doing that. Yeah,
misunderstanding the
yeah,
question under the
exactly.
question. I
Agreed.
think she's
Agreed.
already cleared that bar with him,
Yeah,
but she's like, it hurts to feel like you had the judgment to pick someone other than me.
right.
And when it comes to getting married, it doesn't feel great to kind of come in second in a hastily arranged, we barely know each other type situation. Like you kind
Right.
of want to be first at least then, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah.
So
Do we think this couple is going to make it at the end? I think they're gonna not get married at the altar, but that they will continue to see each other. That's my prediction.
I think so too. And I think like the whole format of the show already feels unfair. I think I already told you last season or 2 seasons ago, like if they cared about these couples, they'd give them 6 months in marriage counseling or couples counseling right
Yeah,
away. Um, it feels so ultra unfair to have to do it in 2 weeks that I just can't imagine. I can't
yeah,
imagine, especially because she's already come home, told her family, oh, I met someone, but he dumped me.
yeah. There was one other moment that I did feel really bad for Zach, and that was when he meets Bliss for the first time, and he says, "Hey, answer me this question. Um, do I make a proper amount of eye contact?"
Yeah.
and and I felt so bad for him in that moment because clearly his Irina and him were a terrible fit, and he probably doesn't like. I don't think they'll ever talk again, probably. Um, but she still hurt him. She still made him self conscious about a bunch of things, and that's a bummer. No one deserves that. So even though I'm bearish on Zach, I'm still a human being. There's still blood flows through my veins, and I still feel bad when Zach now has a effing complex about uh his you know his eye contact.
Well,
So
I think let me tell you the maximally positive story. I think, and some of this is coming from them, like how I think they're framing it, Zach
mhm,
and Bliss. It was always going to end up this way anyway. We were always going to get engaged, even if, whatever happened with Irina, it was never going to work out. And you were always going to be my choice in the end because that was kind of like a false thing, and I had to run it down. Um, and you got super sick and almost didn't make it onto the show. Do you remember him talking about that?
yes,
So it was fate that brought us together. And if it's within the format of the show or outside of the format of the show, it doesn't matter. Like it was going to be us, I think is like what they're trying to
yeah.
hold on to.
Ty in the chat says they're the only other couple that has a remote chance of making it, so I'm kind of okay that Bliss/Zach is breaking the format. Alana
Yeah,
says Bliss and
that might
Zach,
be
I
right.
think, have a way better chance than most of the couples.
And because they had the opportunity to break the format, she has a more informed feeling consent, to like what she's signing up for. So she's an adult, or at
Yeah.
least we keep saying, she seems relatively stable. So
Yeah. Yeah.
um
Something before we
so
move on to
she really did choose it, knowing everything.
before we move on, I did want to mention, we have referred to the fact that Seattle's a small town, and I don't think people really like understand that on a deep level. Joy, I think people here say that, but it is a fact that since we recorded the first episode, we have each had a person reach out to us and say that they know someone who's on the show. Like
Right.
they are friends with someone who is on the show. So I
Yes.
did what you want to illustrate. I wanted to make sure we covered that because we spent 30 minutes talking about why this show doesn't really do a good job of capturing Seattle, just because of the final contestants.
But I also
And yeah,
do feel like that's why people in Seattle that we know are all watching it more than if you were in New York or Chicago and there's a dating show
yeah,
set there. You wouldn't be like on the edge of your seat going, "Oh my God, I've got to know somebody on this show." So,
right.
like in my case, I know someone who went to church with a woman who was in the 30, but she wasn't. One of the featured engaged couples. And my friend had nothing but super positive things to say about her. I think her name is Kacia, Kacia. And then you I will obscure it. I think the view on your friend's friend was less
I had a
positive.
friend I had a friend who said, "Hey, I know this person and they are terrible, but they aren't in the final couples." So anyway, but yeah, wanted to illustrate that it's a small world in Seattle.
And
Okay,
it's not that we know everyone. It's that it's so small, everybody knows everyone, so it defies belief that we would not have known people. And that's just an extra metal layer of like pleasure for us, is spotting all the folks we know in places we know.
okay.
Oh,
Well, I said this
so
wouldn't take a long time, but we only got one couple, so
well, I think the rest will go a lot faster.
all right. Who should we do next, Joy?
Well, let's say farewell to Irena, who shows up to have a clearing the air conversation with Micah, which pretty much seems to consist of Micah going, so like, I think that was actually like really like fucked up. And Irena seems to have like actually no explanation other than, oh yeah, I basically wanted to do that. And let me just be clear, like, I really respect you, but like, I also, this is me showing you respect, is I will fuck you up. Um, and Micah is like, because they're both really somewhere between like expert level and god tier mean girls. Micah, 2/3 of the way through this conversation, drops, well, yeah, I mean, I know it's not a threat because I know he's absolutely not interested in you. And you can feel Irina flinch a little bit, because Irina is so vain that even if there's no prayer of it actually going anywhere, she still wants to think like, he's attracted or could be attracted. And I just thought that was real chef's kiss from Micah to just
Mm-hmm.
twist the knife. I suspect their friendship is over as a result
Mm-hmm.
of this, because it was just under this one circumstance.
Yeah, yeah. Although she does refer to her as best friends in quotes a couple times during the course of the thing, so I don't know
Yeah,
what
well, they
Micah's
were
definition of
definitely
this. Yeah.
pod-based best friends. So Micah and Paul, whew, we get to meet Paul's mom. We get to meet Micah's friends, which is real rough. And we learn some really odd things about Micah, including that she lives part of the time in Arizona. I am really struggling to understand her backstory. Like, I think you and I discussed this last time. We couldn't quite like place her. I said, I think she's from Snohomish County. Breaking news, I think she's from Snohomish County. And I feel very, 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 very good about myself for nailing that. That is the county kind of
Mm-hmm.
one north of King County, which is where Seattle is. But she also like has this very like sorority sister kind of blonde hair. The Arizona second location really makes sense with her look, because there are not a lot of women with her look in Seattle. Um, and
Alana says they dropped the Arizona stuff so casually with no explanation in this
Yeah,
episode.
it's very odd that someone who's maybe 27, 28 years old could afford a second home, between, even if she's
Yeah.
renting two places, that seems very odd. And she's really keen to continue that arrangement with Paul. Um, it feels like later on she has agreed to actually move into his place, which is interesting. It's pretty tight quarters. But this is like, I found it really interesting that it almost felt like they were living in two realities. And the reality Paul lives in felt like Seattle. His place felt like a guy who hikes a lot and is very practical and very sciencey, would just put out his 6 favorite shirts and he would just keep them out in a little pile. And that would be fine for him. And he'd Craigslist his couch and he'd
Yeah.
get his stuff for
And
free.
and
Like
and
I do that.
he'd have knives everywhere, you know? I have knives everywhere, so I know.
And part of the practicality of moving in together is that it's incredibly expensive in Seattle. So I don't know how they could afford, to go back and forth. I don't know how she affords it in the first place. And I don't know if he owns his place. But, we've actually in prior seasons, a couple that did get married, to our really huge surprise, was Matt and Colleen. And they didn't move in together despite being married for at least 6 months. I don't even know if they've done it now. So if Dallas is not that affordable, I think it's even worse here.
Yeah,
Um,
basically, there's a big part of this story that is not being told. We don't know what it is, but they're clearly leaving out a bunch of important details, right?
Well,
So,
so the things that Micah is dropping, like, I have a second place in Arizona. And by the way, I noticed she has this like Cartier piece of jewelry, which is extremely expensive. It was giving to me like, oh, she's got wealth. But then when Paul's mom meets her, and she's admits to stalking her online basically and looking
yeah.
up all of her backstory. Her mom is a very deep Christian who owns a daycare. It doesn't sound like there's a lot of money in that in Alabama. And then I'm not sure about Micah's dad. So I think there are a lot of question marks and mysteries for me, with Micah specifically. Do you want to talk about? Side note, I don't know if Paul is from New Orleans. His mom is, and I found that surprising too.
Hmm.
Um,
Do I want to
do,
talk
do
about
you want
what?
to talk about the party for
Yeah.
Micah's friends?
It was a very weird edit because it shows Paul basically being very dismissive of Micah's friends. Uh, at one point, no. At one point, he says, she says like one of her friends says, "I'm not into this," or "I don't agree with this," and he says, "Well, I don't care." Uh, and but I didn't really understand. If you go back and watch it, I actually watched it twice because I was trying to understand what led to this, and it was just very unclear what was the series of offenses that led to this point. Um, but I think I got the fundamental basics, which are that
Yeah.
her friends didn't like him, and he also didn't really respect them too much. And there is that very painful interaction where he says, "Yeah, I don't care what you think of me," and she says, "Well, you should, because these are my best friends." And I agree that was not a great thing for, even if he thinks that, that's not a thing that Paul should say on this date where she is bringing him to meet her friends for the first time.
Did you see that the friends sucked?
Yes, I did see that. I did see that. Yeah.
Um, they were so
I wasn't trying to say
negative.
I wasn't trying to say he did anything wrong. I was trying to say I didn't understand the series of interactions that led to that point,
Okay.
and
Okay.
I feel like it was heavily edited is kind of my sense. But
For
I got
sure. For
I
sure.
got that they didn't get along, and I don't think that's in dispute, right?
Well,
So,
so I think actually the friend one, brunette friend, came around on him or was neutral
mhm.
and gave it the thumbs up, right? And
Yeah.
then Shelby, I think, is the blonde friend, the one whose birthday it was, in the green dress with the matching satin jacket, which is a really interesting aesthetic choice. It was giving me sort of like a Boys to Men music video of the 90s with like a lot of candles in it, kind of vibe. But anyway, Shelby was the one who was not about it. She was not about it. And
Well, the most brutal thing, it was the setup of it was Micah saying, "Hey, I'm taking Paul to meet my friends. I have completely dressed him and done all of his outfits, and so he looks presentable. So maybe they'll accept him." Which is,
which I mean was such a like odd way to frame that comment, because she's like, he's looking like a snack, so maybe they'll like him. And you do get the sense that they're very appearance focused.
yeah,
I would say their aesthetic and mine does not overlap.
shocking.
But I know, I know. If I
Mhm.
had $100 extra, I would not be getting lashes. I'd probably just, spend it on more stuffed animals. So I think, setting aside that we come from sort of different demographic realms, me and this set of friends.
Uh-huh.
Um, I I think the problem for me is not that Paul was actually probably a little bit too radically candid in that moment,
Mhm.
and wasn't trying to build bridges with these fucking horrible humans
Mhm.
who were being quite rude to him. Really rude, I thought. It's that actually, if you rewind, do you remember Zach and Paul have a drink?
Yes.
And Zach is giving all this relationship advice, like as if he's coming from a position of clarity, which was really odd. And one of the things that so Paul starts to talk about Micah and he describes her in these very like clinical and mathematical terms. And he basically says, yeah, it's great. It's great. She's not overly intellectual or analytical. He says she's not overly analytical. And she meets, yeah, basically she meets all the minimum criteria for the perfect woman, which was like such an odd
Yeah. That's a
way
very
to think about like a
that's something
scorecard.
I might that feels like a very David Chen-esque thing to say, you know?
You know what it reminded me of? When Jeff Bezos texted Lauren Sanchez, "I love you alive, girl."
Mhm. Well,
Like, beep boop, beep boop. The robot has decided it is love.
the thing the thing that was weirdest to me was when Paul is hanging out with Micah's friends and he's describing the Love is Blind experiment. He's saying, "Yeah, they kind of put you into these double-blind pods where they scientifically assess you." And then one of her friends says, huh, I'm sorry, I can't deal with all these scientific terms you're throwing around. What are you, some kind of scientist?"
No, and
And I
Mike
was
is
just
like, "Oh
like,
my god, that's how he talks." And I was
it's
like,
like,
he's
what
saying
the
a
heck?
normal
This is a
sentence that
completely normal sentence. Like
and
it's
it's
there's
actually
nothing.
pretty
There's nothing.
interesting. So
That's when I was like, is there something wrong with the edit? Did they remove
no,
8
no.
paragraphs of Paul being really cerebral? Because I was thinking to myself, this is just a normal sentence. If you said this sentence at the last place I worked, at a tech company, they would say that's one of the least sophisticated ways of describing that phenomenon ever. So
Yeah, yeah. I
the
thought he
idea
was
that they're
being like welcoming to them
yes,
by like breaking it down and dumbing it down for them.
yeah.
But
So
they're
the idea that
also
they're like,
quote
oh, this is
unquote
so scientific, oh, I can't handle it. It's just like, okay, this, the woman is saying like, this isn't it. Yes, that is how I feel. That is how I felt at that moment. This ain't it, Chief. This ain't it.
well, so I think the problem is she it's true. He's nailed it. She's not overly analytical and neither are her friends. And when he says I don't really respect you to the friends, he doesn't really respect her either on some level because they're highly correlated with each other as personality types. And so I think that's why Mike is like, "Oh, this is a problem because if you don't get along with these people, you may not get along with me or the other people in my life." And I think this couple is absolutely doomed. I hope they don't continue.
Mhm.
Um, but
That said, we've said that I agree with you. There's no way they're going to make it in the long term. But I don't think Micah's stylistic choices are all terrible. I think you agreed with that as well. That like she was kind of spot on in her assessment of how to improve Paul's apartment, right?
yeah, but I feel
So I'm
like
just saying it's not all bad, you know?
9 people out of 10 would have said the same thing. I don't think it was all that
Oh,
special.
okay, and I'm the 1 out of 10, Joy. So there you
Okay,
go.
listen. You texted me during the show. So we simul watched the show in 2 different cities, and you texted me like, "Oh, my apartment when I was single wasn't that bad, right?" And you were referring to you yourself, David Chen, in your apartment.
I was talking about Kwame's apartment, Joy. That's
Mm,
very different. Okay, that's a whole
mm.
different ball of wax. Um,
I just think that men who live on their own, who are really capable and smart and great and practical and problem solvers and creative like yourself sometimes come up with interesting solutions that are a little non-obvious, like maybe rather than spending the money to purchase a new couch, you might say, oh, the leg is broken, I will prop it up on these leftover GMAT books.
mm, I don't know. That doesn't sound like anyone I know or am. Okay, let's move on.
So I my point is like the bachelor pad vibe is yeah, that is the one
I'm
out of
just saying.
10
I'm just saying
probably.
it's not. It's not like Micah went in. She has like very specific suggestions that were actually pretty good. That's all I was saying. Okay.
Yeah, okay,
I'm
okay.
trying to point out a
But
positive thing about one of the contestants. Sorry
before
though.
we
Sorry,
before
Joy.
we
Okay.
before we leave this topic entirely, I found out Micah did go to Washington State University, which is in Pullman, Washington. It's also north of Seattle, and Shelby, her best friend, who I stalked all the way to like figuring out her Instagram handle and her TikTok, both private, um, also from Edmonds, Snohomish County. I nailed it.
Good job. Good job.
You don't seem to feel like as deeply like how wonderful this victory lap is,
I
but
don't. I don't.
I
But
feel
it's
very
okay.
good about myself. Thank
All
you.
right. Great. All right.
All
Who's
right.
next? Who's next?
Oh, let's talk. Let's be happy. Let's talk about Brett and Tiffany.
Okay. Fine. The
Tiffany's
only
friends seem great
yeah. Oh,
by
Tiffany.
comparison.
That was the thing. I literally we were watching it. We were watching. I was like, oh, Tiffany's friends seem so cool. I would love to like hang out with these people. They seem wonderful, nurturing, etc. Completely unlike Micah's friends. Um, and so they seem lovely. Here's my suggestion here's what I wish for Tiffany is that she would Google how much a director at Nike makes. Because I think if she Googled how much a director at Nike makes, she would not be concerned about Brett spending some money on $1,200 luggage, which, by the way, isn't even that expensive for luggage. I mean, I use luggage from Costco, so I'm not like a big spender, but I know that $1,200 is not that much for luxury luggage. A director at Nike, according to Glassdoor, makes around $350,000 per year. I think he can afford some luggage, Tiffany.
And he lives in a one-bedroom apartment.
Yeah.
So
So he's
I
not. Yeah.
actually I thought this was honestly really beautiful. Like they clearly come from two different worlds to an extent in that she's like calling him very bougie, but she is she gave zero gold digger vibes. She didn't come in and
Yeah.
say, "Oh my gosh, look at all these like expensive shoes and great clothes and that's something I'm going to get from him." She's like, "I can handle the expenses 50-50." My guess is she's not making as much money as he is, and so but she's like,
Few are. So yeah.
I really admired her for like not knowing and not caring, or not
Mhm.
having, you know, uh, like a curiosity even necessarily to find out. What she was interested in is like, are you overextended? Am I going to have to support you? But she is like, I make enough money for myself. I cover myself and it's fine. But like, I
Yeah.
can't take on like buying people Louis Vuitton luggage or whatever this is.
Yeah.
And so when she said like, are you overextended? And he kind of looks at her like, no.
Have you Googled my position? Because it literally takes 3 seconds to
I
to.
love that she doesn't know. Do you know what I
Mhm.
mean? I feel like there was no that what that says to me is there was no like, oh my gosh, she's a design director at Nike, like glamour,
Yeah.
sort of like
Yeah.
putting stars in her eyes about him. And then you really do see that the financial circumstances matter because she's like, I think it would be tight in here. And he's like, oh, well, if you like this building, we could just move to a different unit that's
Yeah.
2 or 3 bedrooms. And I'm like, dude, that's like probably twice as expensive if you go to 3 bedrooms. And he was also
Huge flex, and I loved it. He's just like, yeah, we could just
yeah,
move. We could
yeah.
just move to another unit. That doesn't even think. Didn't even hesitate.
A guy who didn't go to college. I
Yeah.
fucking love it. So
Yeah.
anyway, I think there's like a settledness about Brett, and he's also like, we could 60-40 or
Yeah.
whatever the split is. Like I don't necessarily expect it to be half and half. Um, and I feel like with this couple, they're so good that they have to like manufacture things for us to like pay attention to, like, oh, he leaves water on the floor, which is a thing I can't stand. But it wouldn't be like a deal breaker in getting married to
Mhm.
someone. And really the worst moment I felt like in that whole storyline was when Tiffany tries to cook and she goes for a Le Creuset, which is so heavy, this cast iron, with this little kitchen towel. And I'm like, she's not going to be able to lift that thing. Plus, she's probably going to burn herself. And all she manages to do is like accidentally slide it off the oven and onto the glass oven door. And
Yeah.
I was
Brutal.
really worried that
Yeah.
the whole oven door would
The oven
shatter.
was gonna break. Yeah.
Yeah. But,
Yeah.
that one is going to require a relocation and she seems pretty open to it. And I'm really like thrilled for them that, this seems like grown people talking
Yep.
about grown things in a grown way and compromising. And it's lovely.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Rooting for them. Rooting for them.
Yes.
Which brings us to Kwame or Jackie, and which one do we want
Oh,
to go
these are
first?
both sad.
Yeah, yeah. Let's do Jackie and Marshall first. Couple thoughts on Jackie and Marshall. First of all, I think this is a clear situation of, and there's no judgment here. There's no judgment here, right? It's a clear situation where Jackie just has issues she needs to work out before she can get married or have a serious relationship with someone, I think. Marshall described some of them. I'm not going to reiterate them here on on this podcast, but suffice to say, there are, I think, significant issues around anxiety, around communication, that make it feel like she is not ready for this relationship. Whereas on the flip side, I feel like Marshall has all the patience in the world, is extremely understanding. There's probably things he could have done better too. He probably could have used different phrasing than "I thought you
Yeah,
were
but
my
everyone
project."
says stuff that they
Yeah,
regret saying, and he does try to explain it, and then he realizes like, oh, this is coming
yeah,
across really
yeah,
condescending, and then he
yeah.
takes it back.
So
So
he's not like completely blameless, but suffice to say, overall, he is really trying to do right by her, and it doesn't seem like that's going to be possible. And so this feels like it's heading in a bad direction, and it feels sad because it's possible with enough time, with counseling, with therapy, with whatever, this might be a relationship that succeeds. But I don't think it's going anywhere good. Joy, what are your thoughts?
I mean, really, I don't even think it's about the relationship. I think it's about Jackie's relationship with herself. It's really hard
Yeah.
to watch her knowing like I said this last week too, but like that I think her mental health would be improved if the cameras were off,
Yeah.
and if she weren't in this pressure cooker of a situation. And I also get a little bit of an introversion sense from her. So like having
Mm-hmm.
to like kind of express her feelings in real time all the time, it just feels rough. And yeah, I don't want to repeat the content of what was said. Or, we talked about this last week. What are the real world things that she is trying to juggle? But it's pretty clear she's not going to have a lot of family support for this going forward either, which is tough for anybody. And I don't think Jackie should have been on this show. I don't think if you've never been in a serious relationship that you should get married to someone or even run the risk of getting married to someone after 4 or 5 weeks. Um, and I kind of hate it for her first and foremost because she's like suffering so acutely that I think she even has trouble hearing sometimes what Marshall is even trying to say,
Yeah.
because she's just so upset and in it. And I have been there. I've done that to you, I'm sure. So like I really empathize that this is just not the moment for her. And then secondly, I feel bad for Marshall as collateral sort of damage along the way in that. And um, I know what he means when he says he sees Jackie not as a project, but more like as a work in progress, which we all are, by the way, like no matter what your age, but that he thought he could help her heal and he could support her and, that she could maybe settle. But it feels like the situation is inflaming things rather than calming them down. And Josh, whatever,
Yeah.
like
So it's like,
Josh
why are
seems like
they?
a sloppy drunk. And I don't know why they're inserting that into this situation with her mental state being what it is. It feels cruel.
They're clearly inviting. Well, they probably made the decision to invite Josh before they knew that she would kind of um, deteriorate in the way that she has on the show. But yeah, they invited Josh. They invited Amber to Chelsea's birthday party. Chelsea's like, "Who's that?" Which again reveals that maybe Chelsea wasn't the one that was organizing her birthday party.
They even invited another woman who came with Amber, who I was like, was she just not pictured in the pods? She clearly was a cast member. Who knows who she talked to
I
or
don't
what
even
that was
remember.
about.
I don't. They barely showed. I think they showed a wide shot of her, and that's it. Like I don't think you see her up close, really. So
Yeah.
maybe she is someone we know. But um, I'll tell you, Joy. I had a really interesting experience watching Josh at the Chelsea birthday party. Um, I felt like that scene where Josh is talking to Marshall gave me. And you tell me if I'm like out of line or I'm ridiculous, but um, it gave me ins I feel it gave me insight into what it must be like to be a person interacting with a large drunk man at a bar. Like, whether you're a man or a woman, but specifically in this case, Josh goes up to Marshall and starts saying all this stuff. Like, he looks like he's about to start some stuff, right? And Marshall's mindset is probably something along the lines of, um, "Get the f away from me, you, you drunkard, boorish, horrible person, you." But he doesn't say anything. He doesn't let on. He's like, "Yeah, we're cool. Yeah," he's trying to be agreeable because he knows that the best way out of this situation is to kind of be agreeable with Josh. Because I felt like I got a very sinister, threatening vibe from Josh personally, and I don't know if you felt that way, but
Oh, 10,000%.
yeah,
And I think you're exactly right. Like, it's like when you know someone who's a little bit of a bad drunk and they're at a party, you kind of don't know which way this is going to turn.
yeah,
So you try to keep it light because you're
yeah,
trying to like keep it on that path. But like he's very handsy with Marshall. He
yeah,
is saying very passive aggressive stuff. Hey, that's a sign we're in the Pacific Northwest, the passive aggressiveness,
yeah,
which is like, hey man, like I love you and it's all good, right? Like and there's like a lot of weird coded like threats that sound like
yeah,
positive words, and I appreciated that afterwards they gave Marshall a moment to say, what the fuck was that, to just reflect like that if you felt weird, viewer, that was weird.
yeah, yeah, and it just made me feel like great empathy for anyone, man or woman. Mostly it's women that need to deal with somebody in that situation where like this guy comes up to you and you need to act in a certain way to like get to extricate yourself from the situation
Yeah, and
that
get out
doesn't
unscathed.
yeah that
Yeah.
doesn't reflect how you actually feel about this person, right? You're just trying to like keep things light and so on.
Well, I also noticed that when he walked in, I think it was Kwame who said, "Man, I tried to get this guy kicked off the show and he
Yeah,
just keeps coming back." And I was like, "Oh, there's all this other like backstory stuff
yeah,
that we don't know about." And then they'll drop these hints
yeah,
like that and then never follow up on it.
yeah, yeah.
So, hmm.
But yeah. Anyway, it was it felt very violate. Basically, it felt very violating everything that Josh was doing on the show. Like it felt very gross and unpleasant, and I felt great sympathy for anyone who had to deal with it. That's kind of where I'm coming down on it. The
Well, I think Josh was so overtly drunk, kind of a gross drunk, kind of out of line, and not going to be a real pleasant person in real life, or an easy person to get along with. That there's a moment where Marshall says, "If she picks you, she can have you,"
Yeah,
which is like,
that's the best line of the show. Is like if she picks you over me, then I'm good, man.
yeah, it's all
Yeah, she
as
can
it
have.
was meant to be.
Then that's great. I love this journey for you. Okay.
All right.
Lastly, Kwame and Chelsea.
Is Kwame the Kirkland signature SK or is SK the Kirkland signature Kwame? Because I'm actually starting to worry that Kwame is like the dumbest person ever to do this show.
Why? Why is that?
Because for the second event in a row, he goes up to Micah and he clearly says stuff that is going to be on camera and repeated. That is like, he says phrases like, well, I just want to make sure I understand what, not leave anything on the table before I get married. What does that even mean in this context?
I mean, I think I know exactly what it means.
Yeah, it means he is not committed to Chelsea.
Right. It's. I don't think this is going to happen at all. Like he clearly resents being a house husband. He resents the idea of needing to dramatically alter his life for this person. Um, and I'm gonna say, based on the conversation, like he resents that he needs to like walk this person's dog, which he's never had to take care of a dog before. Um, and I'm gonna say, based on the edit they showed us, it didn't seem like Chelsea was particularly that interested in smoothing his transition into this new life.
I completely agree. And we haven't even mentioned that Kwame's mom, I mean, if Shelby from Edmonds isn't about it, Kwame's mom is really not about it.
Yeah, there's a few things that are really hilarious about the parents. First, or not hilarious, but like notable. But the hilarious part is we get this whole subplot of Chelsea saying, "I don't know, my dad's he can be a pretty harsh dude, you know. And then you meet her dad, and looks like the most gentle human being ever. He's like so supportive and so like warm, and I'm just like, what is this the same? Is this the same dad that was just being talked to? You know, it was just so weird. They build up to this like, oh, Kwame meeting the dad, it's gonna be pretty upsetting, and then he's kind of like this complete normcore, you know, gentle dude who doesn't seem like he would hurt a fly kind of deal. That was pretty comical, I thought. That was my sense. Did you get any sinister undertones from that meeting? Yeah.
Not sinister undertones. I think he just seemed very like surprisingly easygoing. And he seemed to ask the fewest questions of any parents. Of course,
Right.
we only see a certain
Yeah.
edit, but like
Yeah.
overall, they break the news and he's like, "That's great, congratulations!" And he gives her a hug, which is what you would ideally hope for, I think, if you're a contestant in this situation. On the other hand, Kwame's mom, I think, is one of the harshest that we've heard described.
Well, you know, it really struck me kind of the limits of the format of Love is Blind when we saw the Kwame mom conversation.
Hmm.
Um, because Joy, we have recently watched another reality show called The Traitors, right? And yes, there were many things that were concealed from the audience about what happened. I read an article recently about how several members of the cast got COVID and none of that made it to the screen, or one of the cast members actually needed to be replaced because they got COVID, and you don't even hear about any of that. But Alan Cumming is the host of that show, and he is kind of the guide through that show. He is the person who is narrating the show. He has really great outfits. He has really fun narration. He's like, you know, he's always says things akin to, but tonight one of them will be betrayed and their lives will never be the same. And he's just guiding you through the experience, and it's very fun and campy. It just struck me that Nick Lachey and Vanessa are in the show for about 8 minutes total per season, you know? And it's odd that there is no guide through this show. There's almost never any on-screen text, right? Except for like 14 Days to Wedding and the person's name and their job. There's no voiceover narration of any kind, right? And I really felt the limits of that with the Kwame conversation, because it's weird to see Kwame have a conversation with himself. Like, I saw some people online were genuinely confused as to what was happening. Like, was Kwame actually talking to his mom? People didn't know. What seems clear to me is that they couldn't get permission from Kwame's mom to use her voice and or likeness in the show. So they just didn't air the parts of the conversation that had her in it. But in any other, if it's a documentary or even a other reality show, you would have someone step in and say things like, Kwame's mom didn't agree to do the show, and so that's why we're only playing his part of the conversation, you know? But I think
Oh,
they
yeah,
think
yeah, yeah.
that would kill this kind of reality they're trying to construct. And so it's just like, and it basically drew attention to the idea that they are trying to create this reality where it makes it feel like you are just witnessing this relationship play out. And anything that implies the existence of a producer or a third party is a distraction from that world they're trying to create. And it was most evident to me during this Kwame conversation. Okay, that's my case.
I mean, I get that it's very low hosting. There's actually more signposting of what's going on and where we are in this season than other seasons. Like in this batch of episodes, I think maybe Marshall at some point says, and at this point we go back to our real jobs, you know, so we're living together, but you know, this is
Right.
what it's going to be like. And we haven't even gotten that explanation in prior seasons. It's actually been incredibly confusing as to what people are doing at different stages. I think I suspect you might be how do I say this nicely? In the past, I feel like there have been very, very chaotic outcomes in the editing of this show that feels either due to budget constraints or no one caring. And so I think what you are saying is maybe a design could actually be an accident.
I guess, but Joy, there are like hundreds of hours of footage. You know, somebody is poring over all this footage and really carefully like assembling it together. So it
I've
has to be
known
it has to be deliberate to me, in my opinion, that they're not like putting in more indications of what is actually going on. In any case, this is all just meta chat. Obviously, the conversation with Kwame and his mom, the part that we heard, seems very painful. Uh, I don't think this couple is going to make it. It's very sad. I don't think.
Is it?
I don't think Kwame is ready to make the sacrifices that are necessary, and I don't think Chelsea is willing to acknowledge the extent of those sacrifices. Or if she
I
is willing
think
to
that
acknowledge it, yeah.
is very true. So actually one of the biggest revelations for me in this batch of episodes is like Chelsea does not seem like ultra moored to like reality in my view. So she, expects him to move there and she's like, well, because my whole life is in Seattle. My family's here. So like this is what I want. And it just, it needs to be this way. And on some level she's not wrong. But then she also says, while wanting to live in one of the most expensive places in America, well, I wanted to have 6 kids, but maybe, we could have fewer. And like she wants to start right away. And he's like, oh, I always had, this idea that with my partner, we'd have time to like enjoy
Yeah.
each other and being together, which is something you and I have talked about as a concept. I think lots of people think that. And she's like, well, but we could do that and have a newborn. And he's like, have you seen a newborn? Like she is a child speech pathologist, but you get the sense that she has absolutely no idea how bad lifestyle is for those first few years that you have a kid. And I found that like almost she's like, well, we could just take the baby to Cabo and hire a nanny. And I'm like, with what money? Like how much do
Yeah.
you guys have?
Yeah.
Because maybe you
That
can afford that. And that is a solution. It's not a great one. I bet you're still tired in Cabo, but like you got to see Cabo at least. But it is a
I
very,
mean,
very, very
Joy,
expensive way to do it.
you and I might even differ about this because I have friends, some of whom listen to this podcast, who I know travel with their multiple children all the time and have a great time. So it's like,
Do they travel with 1-year-olds to
yes,
Cabo?
yes, not to Cabo, but to places similar. So it's like, I know that like the people have different schools of thoughts on this, and we saw it play out. Some people are like, yeah, traveling with children is no big deal, and some people think it's the hugest deal, and
Some people
so
also have children that don't sleep through the night and so, I mean, I think there's like some luck
sure,
involved.
sure. But my point being, I don't necessarily disagree with Chelsea. The point that really rubbed me the wrong way was when Kwame is trying to lay out, like, we don't see the full conversation. So maybe they were talking for like 70 minutes and we only saw 2 minutes. But there's a point when Kwame is saying, hey, you're expecting me to do all these things um, and make these, and she's saying, do you not want to make the sacrifice? Or like, she says something about something sacrifice, and he says no, but it's like a compromise, or like giving up living in Portland would be like not a sacrifice but a compromise. And she said, yeah, that's marriage. And it's like, okay, like that really rubbed me the wrong way, not because she's wrong, but because this partner is saying, hey, I'm gonna need to give up a lot. And rather than say, hey, I really like appreciate that, or I know it's a big give up, and here are some things I'm willing to give up, or whatever,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
she's saying like, yeah, that's part of the deal, bub. So get on board or GTFO. And it's like, okay, like that's not a great, especially with him being the one that's giving up more stuff. Like that's not a great
Yeah,
attitude.
for sure.
So
I think that so setting aside that I think Kwame is maybe congenitally not super ready to settle down because he
yeah,
doesn't know that you shouldn't flirt with your recent ex who's engaged to someone else on camera twice. Um, I do feel for him in those moments that like, hey, life is hard. We're going to have to make a lot of these compromisey decisions. Am I with someone who is even approaching that in a spirit and
yes,
problem solving style that I think I can see myself with down the road? It's not about how
absolutely,
much do I like the person or how much am I
absolutely.
attracted to them or how much I'm attracted to the other blonde girl on the show. But, I don't know. I hope they don't I don't know. I just don't quite see it. I don't quite see the level of commitment from her, even though she's the one getting the stuff. I do see her decor choices. So a lot of debate online about whether she is whether that was too much pink.
Mm-hmm.
At first I thought it was accents of pink, but the more I looked at it, I was like, ooh, that is a very consistent and large number of types of pink. I found it to be on the high end. What did you think?
It's weird because she gives this whole like very moving speech about how her ex-boyfriend didn't let her decorate at all. And so I don't want to kind of downplay the idea of, hey, living in a relationship where she felt like she was kind of oppressed, and then now she feels like she can actually express herself, you know? Like that's a nice thing for her, and I don't want to take away from that. Um, I'll just say that I personally found it deeply offensive. No, I'm just joking. I mean, it's not the choices I would have made. But if it works for her, great. But who am I to judge if your psychological coping mechanism is good or not? You know?
Oh,
Uh,
I think there's nothing wrong with it. I found it just a little incongruous because I find her personality a little bit edgy,
me, mm-hmm,
and not in a bad way,
mm-hmm.
but I didn't think she'd be a person who would have like not just pink hearts on the wall, but like a pink
Well,
armchair.
the thing that really struck me was there was a one of those like lettering boards, and it had the word "moi" on it, like MUAH, like a kiss. I think, if I
Yeah, I
recall
think she
correctly.
also had a
That
pillow,
was
like
the
an
one that was
accent
really
pillow with words on it. Like, yeah,
that was the one
yeah.
that was out of control. Like, I was like, what is that? What is that? You know, what's
I, do you not know
what?
what that is?
I mean, just when you see a pink lettering board that has the word "moi" on it, what is that supposed to evoke? You know, I don't. Anyway, it's a kiss, I know, but it's like, what is that? What's going on there?
Well,
Okay,
why don't you and I reflect on it while we think about some affirmations?
I have put the affirmation. I took a photo of the affirmations and have placed them up on the on the video. So she said that every morning at her mirror, she looks at these 10 morning gratitude affirmations. I will now read the affirmations.
All 10? I'm going to
Num-
be flooded with gratitude by the end. Okay. I'm going to.
number one, thank you for this new day. Number two, I'm filled with happiness and gratitude. Number three, I'm grateful for another chance to live my life. Number four, I'm grateful to feel the air in my lungs and the beating of my heart. Number five, I'm thankful simply for being alive. Number six, thankfulness, appreciation, and sincere gratitude are part of who I am. Number seven, I'm grateful for who I am and for what I have. Number eight, I invite gratitude into my heart. Number nine, today I will have an attitude of gratitude. Number 10, thank you for the blessings this day will bring. End quote. You know, I think we actually have different opinions on this, Joy. I actually think this is I don't have a problem with it, you know? If this helps you to feel more grateful for the day, all the power to you.
I, to be clear, did not quote unquote have a problem with it. I mean, people should do whatever makes them feel well and grounded and whole and whatever. I thought that some of the affirmations felt a little overlapping, like a
Mhm.
little duplicative. Um, but listening to you read them out loud, I now actually think I disagree with 3 or 4 of them. It's like,
You disagree with the thankful simply for being alive. No one should be grateful for that.
no, actually, that was one that resonated with me a lot, and I actually felt my own blood pressure dropping as you were in that part of the list. But you know, sometimes like this is part of who I am, or like sometimes it can feel. Are you familiar with the term toxic positivity? Like I worry that we're like
Mhm.
positive thinking ourselves into a place where we're not like giving space for like, um, I'm grateful to be wired so that I can be sad today.
Mhm. Wired?
That Yeah, we're all wired to
Uh-huh.
experience a whole
Yeah.
bunch of different emotions, including
Yeah.
negative ones,
Yeah.
so like yeah, anyway. Might throw some spice in there. That I'm draft just just throwing out ideas
Okay. Okay.
for the spice. We can
All
workshop it.
right. All right. That sounds great. That sounds great. Okay. So, any other thoughts on this batch of it? We've gone almost as long as the first batch of episodes, by the way.
No way. Really? I'm
Yeah.
sorry to everyone. Well, no, I just want to say um
I will say the first 5 episodes were relatively guilt-free watching, and the guilt is starting to creep back in, and I am not at all confident that this won't be a travesty by the end. In fact,
for an all around travesty.
everyone except for Brett and Tiffany, you know.
Brett and Tiffany deserve so much goodness that if we had to have 4 seasons of this show just to get Brett and Tiffany, it was worth it. That is how I feel.
If 18 lives needed to be destroyed for Brett and Tiffany to live, it's worth it.
Maybe. I'd like to leave everyone with this thought. Those shoe boxes that Brett had can be found at the Container Store. I believe they're currently running a 15% off sale. I have actually purchased dozens of those shoe boxes and then returned dozens of those shoe boxes because they didn't work in my house. But he does have pretty elite level shoe storage, and that's something at the end of the day we can all aspire to.
Indeed. Well, we hope you have enjoyed this chat about the latest episodes of Love is Blind.
What's
You
the
can find-
opposite of a type 5?
You can find more episodes of this podcast at decodingreality.tv. And do leave some comments for us at the YouTube channel, youtube.com/decodingtv, on the Decoding Reality podcast page, wherever you can find us, or decodingtv@gmail.com. Feel free to send us an email. Let us know what you thought of this batch of episodes. We'd love to hear it. But thanks for listening. Hope you're still enjoying. And yeah, there are, I think, at least 2 more drops worth of episodes, right? There is going to be let me make sure I get this right so I don't mess it up, because we're right in the closing hours and I don't want to make a mistake right at the end. But according to the Netflix, there is 2 episodes 9 and 3 episodes that are going to be released on April 7th, 9, 10, and 11. And then April 14th is when episode 12 is going to be released. So my guess is that's going to take us all the way to the wedding next week. And possibly we might even get a wedding. I don't think we probably won't get a wedding decision by the next batch, but we'll probably get to somebody proposing. And then it's like cut to black. And then episode 12 is when they're going to show.
By proposing, do you mean like at the altar?
At the altar, yeah. And then episode 12, they're going to show the conclusion of that, plus like all the other couples. But we might also get a decision by the end of next week. That's also possible. So, and then
we'll see.
And then there's a mysterious episode 13. No release date set yet for that one. So we'll see.
Is it Chelsea divorcing Kwame after she sees the footage of this show? Because if it doesn't fall apart before the altar, it absolutely will after she sees these parties.
Thank you so much for joining us. Hope you had a good time. Decodingreality.tv is where you can get the podcast version of this, but you can also watch it on YouTube. We'll try to broadcast every one of these that we do live. Until next time, goodbye.